You'll be fine, just however you want to handle it.
So I am
No,
confirming that it was right and, but I said I did.
Oh, yeah, we got to come to process.
Great. That's right.
pass on it, or you just say,
You might be able to, but you should not be able to.
so that we don't.
So, yes, he is just so smart.
who are you supporting?
Well, that's why we like,
So
had
you
one
have
more
the
thing, just to the staff, we're like, one more
It's your
sentence.
choice.
So, okay, great,
You
thanks.
can either ask for a nomination,
Okay.
and let everybody name the person that they want. If there's no nominations by acclamation. If there are multiple nominations, and then you have everybody say the name of who they want.
We'll go. Okay, that works. And I get to vote. Okay. So-
Need to look at it because I'm working on something for that. Basically,
All right. Testing. All right. Let's go ahead and call our strategic planning meeting to order. Can I get approval on the minutes? Thank you. Minutes have been approved and seconded. So on our agenda today, we have Land Bank Authority nomination process. Hopefully everybody had the opportunity to look at all of the nominees. We have 5 of them: Becky Cope English, Donald Williams, Emerson Birch, Stewart W., Harriet Whitaker. Any questions about any of these candidates? Please hit your light. All right, Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't particularly have a question about any one candidate. I guess, are we going to vote on somebody today? I mean, at this time, or what's,
Yes, the hope is to go ahead and vote on someone today, or at least establish the process.
okay, well, that was my next question. And then what process? Because I was not clear that we ever established a process for determining one individual.
Right. So we can, I guess we have one or two options. We can either kick it down the field until Darren gets here, or we can try to go ahead and if someone's in favor of someone, you can go ahead and nominate them, and we can vote from there. If it's more than 2 people or more than one person, then we can ask who someone is in favor of.
Well, let me just interject one other thing.
Mhm.
I don't know if you got anybody else. I was assuming that all of these individuals were nominated.
Okay,
And-
so they're all
and-
nominated. Okay.
And if we were going to go from there, like we did before when we were picking a replacement for Councilman Byrd, we just spoke our preference rather than voting necessarily against somebody, or, we just stated our preference. The top maybe 2 vote getters move on and
Mhm.
take another
Just weed
round.
it out.
If we could
Okay.
maybe go through that process.
Yeah. Is everybody okay with that process of stating, I guess, your preference?
Yep.
And then we after the process. All right. So the floor is open. Do I have any recommendations? Preference? Y'all just want to state your preference in order? Roll call. All right. Madam Clerk, would you do a roll call? And this is for the preference of someone that represents City Council on the Land Bank Authority.
Becky Cope English.
Councilman Hill, Harriet Whitaker. Councilman Smith,
Becky Cope English.
Councilwoman Byrd. Harriet Whitaker. Councilwoman Knoll,
Harriet Whitaker.
Councilwoman Coonrod, Becky English. Vice Chair Godwin,
Harriet Whitaker.
that's 4 for Whitaker, 3 for English.
All right, looks like the majority is Harriet Whitaker. That will be our appointment to the Land Bank Authority. Any questions or comments? All right, thank you, council, for an easy process. Come to our next item on the agenda, short-term vacation rental panel discussion. Chair, Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mhm.
Is Dan, I didn't see Dan in the room. Is he in the room? He's out of town. Oh, you're going to? Okay, okay. All right, so just to, before they come up, and they've got a little, I guess, slide presentation that they want to give, just sort of as a background, council. Last week, we discussed, so over the past few weeks, we've sort of, I guess, identified some of the problems or concerns that we were wanting to address. Last week, we asked several questions related to how we wanted to craft the amendment. One of the questions that came up was, should we do away with the overlay? Which immediately threw up my radar, because I knew there were several council members that, to my knowledge, still did not want them in their district. And I thought it would be a waste of time to continue down a road that was not going to gain the full support of the council, or, to me, at worst, have a 5-4 vote. I was particularly hoping we wouldn't have necessarily a 5-4 vote. It would be great if it was unanimous in how we address the amendments going forward. So what I wanted, what I asked Dan to do is just come and sort of present what the committee heard last week, in the sense of what we were trying to address and some of the questions that we needed to answer in order to move forward with some legislation. And then the council just sort of have a discussion about it and maybe come to a consensus of how to move forward with this. So is there any questions before we bring up and give the presentation? All right. Chris, you handling the presentation?
Thankfully, no, we have an expert doing it. Good afternoon, council, and happy birthday, Vice Chairwoman Dotley.
Thank you.
Today with us, we have Professor Chris Acuff from UTC. He is our consultant and yours on this project. I agree with Councilman Henderson. Last week, we hit an impasse on a few issues between the 6 members of the committee that are not reconcilable within the committee, because they were conflicting views on a few things. So we thought it would be helpful to just have a free discussion about where various council people are on some of the details of this. Chris has done a tremendous amount of research from cities all around the country, and he can talk to you about cities that do it right and are happy with the way they do it. A lot of our draft right now, the draft ordinance comes from the Nashville regulations. So he can speak more to that. If you have any questions about the administration, I can handle those during his presentation. But with that, I will call up the very brilliant Chris Acuff for this presentation.
Good afternoon, council. Okay, so since Dan's not here, I won't read through all the things he probably would have, but just to give you some background to build on what Councilman Henderson said, we've had a series of successive meetings over the last few months, and I have worked to identify kind of best practices in what other cities are doing, both in Tennessee and around the country. So I looked at what other cities in Tennessee above 20,000 residents are doing in terms of land use and short-term rental regulation, as well as identified 20 other peer cities in the Southeast based on population size and city characteristics and things like that, to see what they're doing, what problems they're having, and what their ordinances say. So just to give you, a little bit of background on the kind of broad questions. One of the key questions here that we'll ask you to consider, and I'll kind of plant the seed, and then I can come back and answer anything else that you want me to fill in. As Councilman Henderson mentioned, whether or not the city should limit short-term vacation rentals to a particular overlay or expand these citywide. I think concurrent with that question is also, should they be limited to a particular base zone? So like an R1, R2, R3, R4, et cetera. And so when I've looked at other cities across Tennessee, and as well as the peer cities in the Southeast, most of them have not used an overlay. Most of them have just included in the base zone, but most of the ones that regulate in Tennessee do limit it to higher density residential, meaning R3 or R4, or to commercial that allows for residential use. Obviously, that's not to say that that should be what you all should decide here, but just to give you some perspective on what our peer cities are doing. Another process that we've considered is, instead of having, say, council decide on these, is move it to more an administrative process. So that's also what a lot of peer cities are doing, particularly Nashville and Knoxville and others, of having an appeals board. And we've talked about membership of that appeals board that can handle appeals should an administrative process not grant those permits going forward, should they want to do that. So those are some of the big questions. Other questions and discussion that's come up: should fees be increased to help supplement, city staff and or identify other priorities that the city has for helping with affordable housing development, things like that. So that's another consideration that we'll put forward to you. And then kind of concurrent with that as well, should additional enforcement staff be hired? So I know obviously the city has partnered with a company to identify these unlicensed properties and help with better enforcement. Obviously that comes with a cost. And so I think that's also part of that discussion as well. One of the things that I haven't got to yet, because I'll show you a visual here in a second, is a density requirement or restriction, I guess, that I worked on was a couple of hypotheticals based on different density or restrictions on how many short-term rentals could be within a certain distance, so proximity, or within a given parcel or building, essentially, if it's a multifamily unit. And so just to give you an idea of some estimates that I came up with for this, is several cities use somewhere near a 300-foot buffer between short-term rentals, particularly in lower density residential areas. So if we use an overlay as an approximation for that, that would allow for a little over 3,000 short-term rentals, assuming that there's no restrictions on residential use or other types of land use. If you institute a 500-foot buffer based, again, on proximity from one short-term rental to another, that would yield a little over 1,200 within the current overlay. So again, those numbers could go down potentially if you restrict it to only higher density residential or commercial or things like that. But I just wanted to give you a sense of how that looks within the current overlay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I don't know if we're taking questions right now. Chris, do you know how many we currently have? And I think we're calling them absentee rentals now as opposed to non-owner occupied.
Yeah, so I believe Dan, since you circulated this handout last week or so.
382, is that what we're at?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so right now there are 382 non-owner occupied within the city. Now those are the permitted. 500, give or take. Yeah, almost 500 or so that are unlicensed at this point.
All right. Are there any questions? If you have some, please hit your light. Okay. Okay. Councilwoman Burrs.
So my district is one of the ones that no to them. And it was more a question, and the knower got bigger as we had lack of enforcement for across the city. So your numbers have to do with only the ones we know about, right?
Correct.
All right. Those out there that are 500 that are they in and within and without the district?
Councilwoman, I want to correct the ones we know about. That's not synonymous with the ones that are permitted. We now know about a lot more than the ones that are permitted. Only about half of them are permitted. So the ones that we know about are about 900, which includes quite a few in District 6.
All right, so you have the district, the overlay, and then you have that are not in the overlay.
Yes, that is the total.
Ones that are unpermitted.
Yes, this is the total number that we can identify through the new software.
They may be either place.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So, Chris, this presentation of what it might look like if we used a 300-foot buffer or a 500-foot buffer, to me demonstrates that might not be specific enough. So potentially pairing that with some requirements related to other forms of density. But I've had some ideas brought to me by a constituent, and I wonder if you all have begun to discuss them on the planning side. Things like a percentage within a city block. For example, 12.5% of a city block on single family, 25% of a multifamily building cap. Are you all looking at those? I personally would like to see some approaches that way.
Sure, we have. I think the the discussion, obviously, these things kind of move together, but I think a lot of the discussion was, if it were the will of council to move to higher density residential rather than allowing it in R1, that may look different in how the wording is versus if we do allow for it in R1. Obviously, a city block in a downtown urban core is a lot different than a city block in other parts of the city, even within the overlay. So originally, that's why we sort of looked at it as a distance versus a density within a particular unit or parcel. But I think we could look at both of those certainly.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any other questions? All right, now I did have a question about the overlay district. Well, in general, are there any districts that do not have short-term vacation rentals, whether legal or illegal? Of all nine, are there of all our 9 districts? Are
Yeah,
there any that
I
don't
believe
have them at
every
all?
district has at least some, including unpermitted.
The answer to your question is no. They're in all 9 districts.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, that's all the questions I have. I don't see. Oh, go ahead and hit you. Okay, go ahead, Councilwoman Knoll.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have never understood why, if you're zoned in R1 and someone petitions and buys a piece of property in R1, and then they are allowed to have an application there in R1, which it definitely states that short-term vacation rentals are not allowed there. And why? When they come for that, why is it that we continue to let them have an application for a zoning for an R1?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Right now, the current ordinance does not preclude them from R1. It's just we have the map within the city. So currently, that's why people would bring them, because they're allowed.
I was under the impression R1 was single family dwelling
Mm-hmm.
and for short-term vacation, because we have a slew of them in District 8.
Yeah, you have some of the most.
Are zoned for R1, and they come in under the radar and are allowed to stay when it is clear that the constituents and the residents there do not want them, do not.
Yeah, this speaks to exactly why we're having this conversation.
Mhm.
Okay,
All right,
thank you.
all right, Councilman Henderson.
So, Chris, were you through with your presentation?
Yes, sir. I mean, I'm happy to answer questions as we go. I can come back up.
Well, and that's where I didn't know where we were, Madam Chair. I didn't know if we were kind of in discussion time. I knew we were asking questions, but I didn't know now if we were ready
Yeah.
for discussion or if he
Yeah.
needed to go through some other data or.
Okay, would you all like to see the remainder of Professor Akos' presentation, or do you all want to continue discussion? I guess we can move forward with, I guess if you have a few more highlights in your presentation that you would like to discuss, or if Chris.
No, I was going to say,
Anderson
if I
had
may,
anything
I mean, we can go back to the questions if you want to discuss them one by one, and Chris and I are happy to give context or answer any questions you might have.
All right. All right then. So I think one of the key questions, I know, serving on the ad hoc committee with Councilman Henderson, one of our biggest thing is the overlay district. Do we want it citywide? And, if not, I guess we'll keep the same districts that currently have them. But if so, I guess if not, we need to know, do you all want that? Is that something your constituents want, such as I think District 6? What other districts don't have?
3, 3, 4, and 6, and 5
3, 4, 5, and 6.
are completely
4.
out of it.
Okay, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are out of the overlay. However, they do have them within the district now, whether they're doing it or not.
Unpermitted.
Unpermitted
that's,
right now. So is this
right.
something that, as part of this discussion, is this something we want to look at citywide, 3, 4, Councilman Smith, Ledford's not, Chairman Ledford's not here, but Councilman Smith and Councilwoman Burrs, would you consider it being would you be open to it just being citywide, or do you want to continue to let continue to stay how you are? Okay, go ahead, Councilwoman Burrs, and then I have Councilman Smith.
Councilman, you want to go first?
No, please go ahead.
Spoken.
Okay. Oh, wait. Oh, hit
I
it
can go.
again. Go ahead, Councilman
Thank you,
Smith.
Madam Chair. I haven't changed my position on this. I opposed it previously. I will oppose it again in my district. With that said, there are a few ways that I could see it potentially opening up to a larger scope, such as one of the options is saying not in R1s. I mean, that's where my opposition has come from in my district
Okay.
significantly was in an R1 area.
Okay.
In commercial areas in my district, I don't see where there would be opposition to it. So if we want to continue the conversation that way, I'm definitely open to having that discussion. But otherwise, I would still be opposed to just opening it citywide as is.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Councilwoman Burrs.
Mine is pretty much the same. My district, after a number of meetings, was definitely opposed to it, but I think they were opposed to was in R1s and this terrible record of enforcement. The argument that I kept hearing was, even if it went citywide, if it went whatever, you don't enforce what you got now. How can we make sure? I mean, and you don't know what you've got. They read the papers too, and they know that there's a bunch of them that are operating in league, and they're still, after returning, contacting me and me turning it in, they're still there. And so they don't really trust anything we come up enforcement wise. And frankly, at this point, I don't blame them. What I think would be really good is if we keep it in a district and get a track record of really positive enforcement. And then trust would be there. And my concerns are mainly with what are you calling the non-owner occupied? What's it? Absentee. With those that turn into party houses, or it gets rid of neighborhoodness. That's not what they signed on for. So I think that there's a couple of things there. I think that you could have more dense areas. You might have them in places that are kind of wink being used now in various complexes. I'd stay away from R1s. And it's I hear over and over again, the enforcement track record is a joke. So until that can be trusted, I don't think anybody's interested. I would have to vote against it if I'm representing all my people. The complaints I've gotten I've gotten maybe 15 in the past 2 years that have said they would like to have this because they need it as income. And there are some owner occupied, I don't think anybody has a problem with. It's this, it keeps coming back, this enforcement thing. So I really think that if you leave it the way it is, or my vote would be show that there is an enforcement track record and that it will be kept according to Hoyle, and look at it again, that may change.
Thank you so much. Councilman Henderson?
If you've got anybody else that hasn't
Oh, yeah.
spoken, I'd be happy to yield.
Okay, Councilwoman Noel has a statement.
But I've spoken if you want to go ahead, and I'll come after you if you want to.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Ma'am.
Go ahead.
So here's the concern that I had with restricting a zone or placing it in a zone. That's what we took this out of. It was in zoning. You had to be in an R3 or an R4 in order to do a short-term vacation rental. And we were seeing what I consider spot zoning, even though we don't call it spot zoning. And we were hearing neighbors say, we don't have really any opposition to the use. We don't like the zone, use putting R3s in some R1 neighborhoods. Now, and maybe we could get clever to the point that they couldn't. So I made a statement last week. I would not support any short-term vacation rental tied to zoning because I didn't want that to precipitate zoning requests coming before this council and us hearing a repeat of what we heard even before we had this legislation.
Mhm.
If we limit it to high density areas, that could potentially take care of itself, but do we have enough ability to do that? I mean, do we have the ability to say we're only going to do absenteeism in high density areas? Now I think that possibly could prevent somebody requesting it to be rezoned to an R3. Maybe we don't tie it to necessarily a zone, but to a density question that already exists. And maybe that would be somewhat acceptable. But then the question becomes, if what I'm hearing, it seemed like Councilman Smith was okay tying it to a density question and making it citywide, but I think Councilwoman Burrs is still opposed to it. I wish Councilman Ledford was here to be able to weigh in on this, because what I didn't want to do is go down a particular road and then we not all be on board with it. So I don't know if somebody in zoning could answer that question, if it's possible to.
Councilman, I can address that. We've talked about a density cap, and that's something that's certainly on the table, and we can do it. Where we came at an impasse on this when our committee got together, our drafting committee,
Yeah.
because we can't draft with you in secret. So where we came to an impasse was we are having a hard time saying that if you have a commercial property between two hotels on Brainerd Road or 153, you cannot have a short-term vacation rental. But if you have an R1 on Glenwood Drive, you can. Like that's where it came from. So density did play into that, because we had major thoroughfares and commercial zones in mind when we talked about expanding outside of that overlay to where it actually, because it's a more commercial use when it's an absentee. So tying it to density is something that a few other cities have done specifically without to the zone, and Chris can talk about that. But like he mentioned in his presentation, we would have, it doesn't mean it's impossible, but we would have to adopt different density numbers. In my neighborhood in Jefferson Heights, the lots are 25 and 30 feet wide sometimes. And in a lot of Lookout Valley, they're 60 feet wide. So just a number wouldn't do it.
So just to let the council know where I would stand on this, I don't have a problem with keeping the overlay. I would like to see some kind of density number placed on what we do have on the absenteeism, whether that's a 500-foot buffer, limit the density to multifamily, whatever the case may be. But I'm good with keeping the overlay, but limiting the number to some density component.
Okay.
And all of our conversation right now is strictly about what we're calling now absentee, not the homestay.
Not the homestays. Thank you very much for being on the vocabulary. We've adopted that. Other cities have done it also because it's less confusing than owner occupied and non-owner occupied, but homestay and absentee sounds more like what it is.
I'm trying to be very politically correct.
I appreciate
Thank
that. That's some growth.
All right. Is that it? Is that it, Chair, Councilman Henderson? I keep calling you Chairman Henderson. I can't. That's how I met you.
Easy.
That's how I
Ease
met you.
up on
That's
that.
how I met you. Councilman Henderson, is that it?
That's it.
All right. Thank you so much. Councilwoman Knoll, followed by Councilwoman Hill.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going back to the large amount that we have in District 8. Once again, District 8, it seems to me that if it's not wanted anyplace else, then you throw it into 2 or 3 other districts and just overload them there. My thing is the rules are not enforced, the laws are not enforced because we jumped through every hoop that was placed before us and we did everything we were supposed to do in order to stop short-term vacation rentals. And then the guideline was changed in midstream on us, which once again come in the back door in the underserved areas and place it here because it's not wanted anyplace else. They're not going to be enforced, have not been enforced. We have so many illegal ones in District 8 that it is unacceptable. We have also, they said that they're owner occupied. They are not owner occupied. There's 3 I know for sure. They actually live on Signa Mountain, but they say they live in District 8. But for sure, I know they do not. So this, once again, is an overload for District 8, which we definitely don't want any more of. And we want those that are in there illegally to be shut down.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Knoll. Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chair. This conversation about the potential of moving it citywide, for Councilman Smith to bring up the fact that perhaps if we were looking in the R3, R4, that was really interesting. And I've said many times how much I enjoy working with all of you. I just love the way that we're able to work toward compromise. And so let me say thank you once again. Thinking about this idea and what Councilman Henderson was saying with high density. So in my district, we are, I think we definitely experience some of the R1 to R3 conversions. And in my district, we have very little diversity of housing type. We have almost exclusively R1 in most places, and we've lost multifamily properties to short-term vacation rentals. And so I'm interested in the possibility of this idea of zones, having a high density zone, but also within that zone, having a cap on short-term vacation rental within that property. So, for example, if you are in a commercial zone and you have residential in District 2, I want there to be a blend of units there. I don't want to see an R3 6-unit, 4-unit go up and all of them be short-term vacation rental. I would like a density cap within that. So were that to be the way that then in District 8, if a quadplex is built, one of those can be a short-term vacation rental. And the others have to be regular housing or commercial or whatever the zone would hold. I think part of this is all going to work toward a greater professionalism of this industry to my colleagues' points about enforcement, that if we are enforcing and we also have added some professionalism kind of requirements for the way the numbers have to work to make these units work, we're going to see better operators because there's a slightly higher level of difficulty to get into the business. You can't just open a bank. You can't just open a hotel. You have to have some certain professional standards. And this could this could help Chattanooga overall, I think.
Okay, you good, Councilwoman Hill? Yes. All right. Councilman Henderson, with all the discussion we've had today, I know we have our next meeting November the 1st. Is that right? Okay, so can we take these recommendations back to that meeting? And we can discuss it at that time? And if there's any other questions or anything, you can email Chris Anderson and just send him your questions or any additional items that you would like to discuss. I'm sorry, Councilman Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one follow-up, and I'm going to ask now so that when we do have this follow-up meeting, just in case it comes up, one of the options, and I've heard it mentioned up here a lot of times, does have to do with limiting the total number of STVRs in a certain area, right? In your research, have you come across any legal challenges to that, such as my neighbor got their application in first, so they get it, and I don't? That's not fair. Like I find it hard to believe that you're not going to get some kind of challenge in that, and maybe it has, and it's been defeated. I'm not sure.
Sure. So I'll say, from a non-legal perspective, but yes, other states are having challenges. To my knowledge, no one has done this in Tennessee yet. So North Carolina, I believe, Wilmington had one. They limited the number, and they instituted a lottery as a fair way to, I guess, assign those. And the state court struck down the lottery. It was essentially an arbitrary way of deciding those. But in our discussions, and again, we have not looked into at least I yet, but at least within use within Tennessee, there is precedent for restricting things by distance. So that was kind of the our thinking on that. But to my knowledge, it has not been instituted or challenged in Tennessee. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I would just put it out there as a word of caution to the council that if we were to move forward based on that stipulation, it may not hold up. So there could be some unintended consequences there, just as a point of consideration.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just saying, if I could follow up, in most of those cities, like in Nashville, et cetera, they do limit it by, higher density. So again, it becomes a de facto limit on how many you could possibly fit within a given area. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, you good, Councilman Smith? Yes, ma'am. All right, thank you so much. So with that, I think that'll close out the discussion. And thank you so much, Chris and Chris. We appreciate you very much. Moving on in our strategic planning agenda, we have the proposed record ordinance. That was something that I am currently working on. Our clerk did send out a red line version of this. Thank you to the city attorney's office for getting it done for me. I appreciate you. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at it, and I would like for it to move into legislative committee, Councilman Smith, if the council is ready for that to move in to that committee. All right. All right. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. And do we need to go ahead and set a date?
You tell me which date you want, and I'm happy to apply.
All right. It's different. Okay. Working it out. Let's look at maybe November the 15th. Okay. Thank you. So we'll discuss that November the 15th. Moving on, and other business, pending legislative matters, city election cycle. Councilwoman Coonrod, did you have any comments or comments about this? All right, there you go.
Are still working on the legislation to present to council. So we should have an update by next. So much done changed, in that office. So we still working on some things. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Council. The next was removal of political signs. Councilman Hester isn't here as of yet. Noise ordinance, Councilwoman Burrs. Do you have any updates or comments? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. We're finished. Phil, I've given Phil the go-ahead to circulate. We've done all we can do, and I think all my colleagues will want input. So we're ready to circulate and then put it in committee. Phil needs to circulate it first, and that hasn't happened. But we talked last week. So once it gets circulated, let me know. This is our best work. We expect you to red pencil it, council, and have discussion in legislative committee.
All right. Do you want to move to legislative committee November the 15th as well?
That's fine.
Okay. Councilman Smith, November the 15th for noise ordinance and record ordinance. Thank you so much. Pending presentations, looks like volunteer behavioral health on November the 1st, a quarterly report from the library, also in November, and agenda modification process, January 2023. And our next short-term vacation rental meeting will be November the 1st at 12:30, actually back in the conference room. And let's see what else. Council agenda, of course, agenda session is at 3:30. And board appointments, please remember your appointments. Community advisory boards for the council, for the community centers are, of course, available. And you all have these listed on your and the industrial development, I guess, is on this agenda. Sure, and look at the current vacancies as well. If you have any questions, of course, I'm gonna throw Chris Anderson back under the bus. So if you have any questions, you can see Chris Anderson about those in regards to appointments. Or
Did Chris leave?
did Chris leave?
He's in the lobby.
Okay, he's okay.
I just,
You had a
I have
question?
a question
Okay.
about that.
Which one? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, hold on for a second. Give me just a moment, Councilwoman Burrs. Chairman Henderson, Councilman Henderson, I'm gonna get it. Did you have any questions?
I did.
Okay, hit your light one more time. Everybody hit your lights again. Okay, go ahead,
Thank you.
Councilman Henderson.
I want to move back up to the library. It says quarterly report dash library transition, and this was Joe Dunrine. Is this going to be a report of, I guess, our understanding of the state law, what possibly can be restructured, whether we can take this in as a department? But, before budget time rolls back around, it seems like that's the only time we ever talk about the library. I want to make sure that we're, before budget rolls around, we've decided what we're going to do this go around.
So there was, I'm not sure, on the Chattanoogan, there was an announcement today that Corinne Hill is resigning. And so we can talk more about that, but we will have an update, regularly quarterly update here in a couple weeks to talk about by Richard Beelan, who will be the interim library director, in terms of where the library is at and where it's update for the council.
I'm going to follow up with a question then. Will it also include updates about the state, whether we can fold the library in as a department?
We can have that conversation. I think it's helpful to talk through some of that offline between now and then, but
Okay, by the way, I want to throw this out. You're doing an outstanding job as Public Works Director.
I hope it's short-lived. So, all right, thank you.
All right, that's it, Councilman Henderson. All right, Councilwoman Hill, and then followed by Councilwoman Burrs.
Thank you. I have a question about the board appointments for the Community Advisory Board. I sent in my advisory board names and folks August 17th. And I was told, along with all of us, I think on August 25th, that there was work being done related to the board term links. And yet we continue to have these boards unformed. And I'd really like an update on what is going on, because I thought we were going to have community advisory boards a year ago, and it's as if we still don't.
That's a very good point, Councilwoman, and I apologize for the wait on that. I was not at first involved with the staffing of these. I am now, and if I didn't get, I don't recall getting that email. Could you resend it to me, and I'll make sure your nominees are processed.
Certainly, yeah. So the entire council and staff got an email saying that some council persons have submitted appointing names for the boards, working to determine the length of the terms of these boards before submitting our appointees to the 2-week agenda. So it's like perhaps Nicole has a little pile of names. I don't know. I'll forward you my email right now. But
Okay, and I will work on getting you the term information. I don't know it off the top of my head for those specific boards, but I will get that to you as soon as possible. The entire council.
Yeah, I mean, the term's neither here nor there to me. I just want the board formed and working.
Understood. We'll
Okay.
we'll get it done.
Thank
All
you.
right, that's it. Councilwoman Hill.
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. Stay on up, Chris. Councilwoman Burrs.
Chris, mine was pretty much the same question. People appointed and they've been kind of in limbo. And Nicole has all the names. And when I've checked, we're waiting for terms and I'm getting calls from them about, so,
I will solve that this week
okay.
and get
Thank
you
you
an answer.
very much.
And speaking of boards, I do have names for you for the other board we discussed last
Yeah,
week.
yeah, because people were really excited to do it and we've kind of left them hanging. And I know it's the term stuff and I know you guys are busy, but if we could reach closure or give me something to tell them.
Absolutely.
I
We'll wrap
appreciate
it up this week and get it in process.
Thank you. My next one is for Ryan. So Councilman Henderson on this, Ryan. Council made it very clear that we didn't want to give $7 million to an agency that we had no control over the decision making. It wasn't as much a personality thing. Let's assume everybody's neat, right? $7 million and we have no oversight on how it's spent. In other words, it's an independent board, is not the best business practice. And so what I remember council saying, or at least my notes show from our hearings, was we wanted to know how we could take that. We do all the accounting. We just don't make the city does all the accounting. It's in our budget to approve or whatever. And council said they were not going to approve another $7 million.
Yep.
These are taxpayer dollars for a private board. And so what I think they were saying issues today have to be with how are we going? Let's say everybody's a good guy. Okay. How are we going with moving it to a board that's accountable to the public?
Yeah, it's a fair question. We'll bring an update in that November session. I think November 4th.
Do we need to be contacting our legislators? Do we need to?
Joda will give the state perspective in terms of.
I understand the state perspective.
Well, I mean,
but
our path there.
Yeah.
I guess. And then Richard will come and bring what I would call a business update around what is the library doing. I think what the feedback was also, from what I heard from the council, was there hasn't been enough reporting. Part of that accountability is the library coming before council and saying, here's what we're doing with that $7 million quarterly. And so this will be the first one of those where we put before you what the library is doing with that $7 million, but we'll also provide some perspective.
it's a
on the
report of
state.
something that's already happened. This
Understood.
is what
Yeah.
we're doing.
Mhm.
Council has said $7 million of taxpayer dollars should not be given to a private board over which there is no oversight. And I believe the quarterly report was to be how we're going to be segueing into that not happening anymore. And so Richard is a great guy. The library is doing great. Nobody's arguing that.
Mhm.
The issue is $7 million of taxpayer, and the council is the one that makes those decisions budget-wise, and we have no oversight. It's not a matter they're doing bad or good things.
Understood.
It's the $7 million.
Understood.
That's
Yeah.
big.
We'll bring the update I guess it's 2 or 3 weeks, that November strategic planning session
Okay.
in terms of direction with the state.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman Burrs. Thank you, Ryan. I see no other lights. With that, are there any questions or anything? All right. See no other lights. We adjourn. Yeah. Thank
You're
you.